Natalie.
I'm Trent.
Kiara. Natalie.
And this is our Weird and Wonderful group assignment. Our focus question is, how do sand dunes form? Enjoy.
Our science activity is specified towards a Year 4 level. Relating to the Australian curriculum, the relevant content descriptor is Earth's surface changes over time as a result of natural processes and human activity. This is located in the Earth and Space Science section.
Sand is the composition of tiny grains spread right across the coastlines and is found worldwide. Textures and sizes of sand grains depend on their habitat. Sand is considered as solid, non-cohesive particles that are larger than dust. Sand dunes are evident on our beaches as they look like great sandy mountains. Sand dunes are mounts of wind-blown sand which vary greatly in size, including from less than 1 metre to tens of metres in height. The sand dune's size depends upon the supply of sand. The study of form and the structure of sand dunes is known as geomorphology. It is known that sand dunes are located in 3 different landscapes, which include sea coasts and lake shores, river valleys, as well as arid regions. In the dry regions, which receive less than 200 millimetres of precipitation annually, the weathering of sandstone and other rocks produce sand that is subject to mass movement by the wind due to its lack of vegetation. Types of sand dunes are dependent upon how they are affected by nature. There are several different sand dune types and variations along the coast, which depend on prevailing winds, sand supply, climate, vegetation, and other factors. The 3 main categories of dunes include four dunes, parabolic dunes, and transgressive dune fields. Dune systems include stationary dunes, large hollows carved out by wind erosion, conical dune forms around the tree or shrub bases, as well as fossil beaches with pebbles on bare sand surfaces. Sand from dunes originates from the intertidal beach and is blown inland to form sand dunes. The general advance of a sand dune is in the direction of prevailing winds, where the embryo dunes closer to the seacoast are subjected to the full forces of wind, and those behind the ridge of the dunes are reasonably protected. Embryo dunes are found at the front of the dunes and are considered as the youngest dunes. For plants, this is a harsh environment due to the salinity, lack of humus, and a pH rating of 8 to 9, thus making a hard place for plants to grow. The formation of sand dunes varies, but the major cause is wind being swept as previously explored. However, sand dunes can form in 2 major ways, which include either vegetation traps, wind-blown sand, or the sand forms ripples and waves without vegetation. Then, once disturbance has acted upon a dune, slip and windward faces develop once height of dune exceeds 1 metre. The formation of the slip face then creates a wind shadow, which is where sand transport ceases, and the slip face therefore moves slowly forward as the sand navigates it. There are several aspects which affect the overall form of sand dunes, these being natural and man-made processes surrounding the dunes. Therefore, according to the current dominant scientific understanding, the CDSU, sand dunes are more often formed by the movement of prevailing winds and surrounding vegetation, which can also affect the overall structure of the sand dune. As the sand dune accumulates more sand from wind movement, this affects the size of the dune.
The teacher begins the lesson by welcoming the students and inviting them to sit at their desks. The teacher then introduces the focus of the lesson, sand dunes and how they form. To help introduce the topic and help the students relate this topic to their own experiences, the teacher asks some prompting questions, such as, who has been to the beach recently? What did the sand look like? Was it flat? Was it in the form of a sand dune? Students are then instructed to work together at their table groups and note down on some large sheets of butcher's paper anything that they already know about sand dunes and how they form. During this time, the teacher will be walking around the classroom, listening to student responses and observing their recordings. Once the teacher feels that the students have been given enough time, they will instruct one student from each group to bring the sheet of butcher's paper up to the front of the classroom and stick it up on the main whiteboard using a whiteboard magnet. The teacher identifies common answers from the students' sheets of paper and acknowledges different ideas, but leaves them for further investigation.
There are adjustments that need to be made in the engage phase for these diverse learners. The student with a hearing impairment needs clear articulation and to talk at a slow or moderate pace so the interpreter can communicate successfully with the student. It is also important that there is a break between speaking to allow the student time to process the information. For the student with autism, the teacher needs to take the student in the classroom earlier and familiarise the student with the materials and surroundings. The teacher will also explain step by step what they will be doing in the lesson and make sure the student has an understanding of the behavioural expectations and safety rules, shown to them verbally and using visual stimuli. It is important that for the child with cerebral palsy, the teacher ensures that the desks have wheelchair access and can allow the student to be a part of a group. The visually impaired student needs small groups so that only one person is talking at a time, and this will allow her time to process the information. It is also important that when somebody is speaking, they are facing the group, speaking clearly, and ready to restate if necessary, as the student is relying on audio. It is important that the teacher encourages all the students to participate in group work and is constantly checking for understanding.
The teacher begins by introducing that they will now explore these concepts through an interactive activity. Before beginning the activity, the teacher reinforces a few concepts from the student's prior knowledge by asking, so what natural forces do we think have the ability to move sand into big piles that we call sand dunes? The teacher then also asks a question to promote student inquiry into this topic, such as, are there any natural occurrences that might stop these forces from moving the sand into dunes? The teacher then progresses by introducing the focus of the activity and the focus question. Now you guys are going to see if you can use one of these forces, wind, to form your own sand dune, to see if we can find out how sand dunes form. The teacher also identifies that during this activity, they will also explore some of the occurrences that can stop this from happening. They also explain that in a moment, when instructed, the students will move in their table groups to an investigation station that has been set up for them at the back of the classroom. The teacher also explains that the students will be interacting with sand, cardboard boxes, and some natural materials like leaves, sticks, and rocks. They will also explain that they will be using a ruler. The teacher then explains the activity to the students. At each station there is 2 open cardboard boxes with no front side. Both boxes contain a small pile of sand that covers the entire bottom of the box. The sand is flat and loose, but does not spill out the front of the box. At each station, there is also a stopwatch and a small container holding some rocks, leaves, and small sticks. The students are to place the rocks, shells, and sticks on and within the sand in one of the containers, with the other left untouched. 2 students from each group will be nominated to be the wind source and will blow on the sand in each box for 30 seconds, attempting to move the sand into dunes. Another student will use the stopwatch to keep time. Once completed, the students will use their ruler to measure their tallest dune from each box and record their results. Please note that before the activity begins, the students will be given a table on which they will fill out their predictions, observations, and a scientific explanation. During the activity, the teacher will monitor the group's progress, ensuring that they are taking down detailed observations and using the materials safely.
The adjustments that will be made in the explore phase for the hearing impaired student is the teacher will explain the method at a moderate pace and demonstrate as she explains the steps. When doing the experiment, the teacher aide will write the student's observations down as they communicate it. The student with autism will already know which station they will be going to and will have a teacher aide there to prompt the student to make their observations. For the student with cerebral palsy, The teacher will need to make sure that the lab area is clear and big enough for the student to have access around the room. It is also important that the teacher instructs the students to move carefully, slowly, and alertly around the room at all times. The visually impaired student will receive a large font simplified hard copy of the materials and method. It is also important that the student hears the observations that others have made in our group, in case they miss anything, and this gives them the full experience.
Once the students have completed their activity, they are invited to return to their desks and complete their tables. The teacher discusses the students' observations while they remain seated, asking the students if anyone else had similar findings. They discuss the students' scientific explanations, being careful to acknowledge all contributions. The teacher asks prompting questions to help support the research questions, such as, what happened to the sand when you blew on it? Was it easier to move the bare sand? How do these both work together to allow the formation of sand dunes? Then the teacher fills in the gaps with regards to the CDSU. This might be done by explaining the fact that sand dunes can be formed as wind pushes loose sand particles into mounds that we call sand dunes.
In the explain phase, for all 4 diverse learners to succeed, some adjustments need to be made. The following adjustments will cater for all 4 students. The teacher should encourage the students to contribute their observations to the group. It is also important that she reminds students when sharing that they need to face the group, speak clearly, and at a moderate pace. The teacher or student, depending on who's speaking, need to be ready to rephrase or restate as necessary. It is also important that the teacher praises the student for sharing their findings, as this will keep the students engaged and encourage them to keep participating. Have a teacher aide present and let the student know that if they don't understand any concepts, they may ask. The last adjustment relates to the visually impaired student. It is important that the teacher prints off the students' observations in a large print and puts it in front of them so they can easily read and therefore share their observations with the group.
The instructions for this task are 1. Before moving to the designated investigation stations, predict individually what will happen to the bare sand and write it down in the predict section of the worksheet, next to bare sand. This can be a worded prediction or the predicted height of each sand type after blowing. Repeat this step for sand with natural materials. 2. While completing the experiment activity at the investigation stations, note that the starting height of the sand before blowing and the height of the sand after blowing in the observation (centimeters) section of the table. Calculate the height difference by subtracting the starting height from the end height. Fill the answer next to height difference on the worksheet. Step 3. Describe the observation for both sand types in words in the next column of the worksheet. Step 4. Explain what happened in the experiment in scientific terms and how it links to the overarching questions, how do sand dunes form? Draw on prior knowledge as well as any new information learnt during the lesson to write this explanation. The rubric goes by a star system, with 1 star, 2 stars, and 3 stars, depending on achievement. These stars go towards predict, observation, and explanation sections. It is seen in each section of the table what academic achievement correlates with what star. We decided to use stars as this is appropriate for students in grade 4 and isn't too complex. In the engage phase, before beginning the lesson, the teacher reinforces the classroom lab safety procedures and the expected behaviour by saying, if you do not know the relevant safety procedures and expected behaviour whilst in this lab, please raise your hand. The teacher also instructs students to place all bags under their tables to avoid creating hazards. To remind students about safety when moving around in the classroom, the teacher says, Remember to move around the classroom safely by walking and being aware of your surroundings and any possible trip hazards. The teacher also checks again that all bags have been tucked under tables. For the explore phase, the teacher says to the class, "Stay seated at your desks and don't move until instructed." The teacher says, "Be careful when interacting with materials. When you are instructed to move to your stations, I want you to first grab your safety glasses from the cupboard to avoid the possibility of getting any sand in your eyes. Do not pick up or throw any of this sand. Be careful when handling the natural materials, as some of the sticks or rocks might have sharp edges or points, and we want to avoid any cuts or abrasions. If you do hurt yourself or find some sand in your eyes, remain where you are and raise your hand for assistance, and a teacher will attend to you." The teacher repeats the class safety motto: "Do not eat, drink, or use any materials as a weapon."